Somewhere, someone sent an encrypted message. My life is in danger. Then they leaked 11.5 million documents, enough to topple governments. And to this day, nobody knows who they are. This is the story of the Panama Papers. In 2016, journalists published documents from a Panamanian law firm revealing how the world's wealthy hid money in offshore accounts. It became one of the largest data leaks in journalism's history. Prime ministers resigned. Governments launched investigations across dozens of countries, and the source behind all of it has never been identified. Not by governments, not by intelligence agencies, not even by the journalists who spent over a year working directly with them. Here's how it actually started. A source calling themselves John Doe reached out to a single reporter at a German newspaper offering an enormous trove of internal law firm data, not a small tip. Over 2.6 terabytes. That's not something you casually email. Doe insisted on encrypted communication only and refused to ever meet face-to-face with a single journalist involved. Not once, across more than a year of contact. The documents were eventually handed to a global consortium of journalists spanning multiple countries to verify and investigate together. Which means dozens of professional reporters spent over a year building an enormous story around a source they never actually saw. So how does someone hand off the biggest leak in journalism history and vanish completely? We'll get to that. The damage was immediate and real. Iceland's prime minister resigned within days of the story breaking, after protests erupted over an undisclosed offshore company tied to him. Pakistan's prime minister was eventually forced out of office too. Investigations into Russia's political elite and offshore dealings connected to family members of world leaders spread through headline after headline. This wasn't a leak that faded quietly. It restructured actual governments, and the person responsible for triggering all of it had already made one thing very clear. They never wanted credit. They wanted to stay a ghost. A year after the first stories broke, Doe finally spoke in an 1,800-word statement. They said they weren't working for any government or intelligence agency, directly or otherwise, and never had been. That mattered because conspiracy theories had already spread that a spy agency must be behind a leak this large and this precise. Doe rejected that outright. Their stated motive was simpler and stranger than any spy story. Income inequality. They said they understood enough about the documents to realize the scale of injustice inside them and felt legislatures worldwide had failed for decades to do anything about it. Not money, not revenge, just someone who'd apparently seen enough to decide the world needed to see it too. Here's the part that makes this stranger than most leaks. For over a year after handing over the documents, almost nothing happened publicly. Doe described sending data into what felt like a black hole, watching, waiting, with no confirmation the story would ever actually run. Then, all at once, roughly 100 news outlets across dozens of countries published simultaneously. An entire year of silence followed by a single, coordinated global explosion. If you were the one person who knew this was coming and had to sit through that silence not knowing whether it would ever surface at all, that's either incredible discipline or genuine desperation. In theory, yes. In practice, no. The journalists who worked directly with Doe have said repeatedly that they still don't know who Doe is, even years later. No metadata slip. No writing-style analysis that cracked it. No government subpoena that forced disclosure. Encrypted contact, refused meetings, and a media consortium that treated protecting their source as sacred has kept this airtight for close to a decade now. Which means every investigation this leak triggered somehow left its own origin completely untouched. Nothing has ever been confirmed. In their statement, Doe referenced the murders of 2 journalists who had been investigating consequences of the leak and said it had deeply affected them. They called on governments to actually deliver justice, not just headlines. Whether they're still out there watching how this story unfolded, or whether something happened that nobody's ever reported, there's simply no way for the public to know. The one person who could confirm it has spent a decade making absolutely sure nobody can. Somewhere, a person or persons triggered the collapse of governments, the resignation of prime ministers, and one of the largest journalistic investigations ever conducted, then disappeared completely, on purpose, and stayed gone. Not because they were caught, because they were simply never found. Most leaks eventually trace back to someone. This one didn't.